This is the Open Identity meeting in BYOID collaboration. And we have Raymond Powell from RChain and New Earth, John Grant from Big Life, and Leah and Amaka from RChain. Welcome. What brings you here today? If someone's talking, they're on mute.
I guess the question was for Raymond, right?
It's for anybody, actually.
Okay.
Why don't you start? What brings you here today?
Oh, to continue the conversation on BYOID and see what direction we're headed in, and also to see where I can actively lend my support to.
Awesome. John?
Exactly the same as what's just been said.
Anything else, Leah? And Leah's on mute. I know she's here. Raymond?
Hey, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Leah.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Thanks. No, I'm basically just here. I pretty much agree with John and Amika, but also I'm here to sort of catch up on things because I've been out of the loop for the past few weeks. So thanks. On to you, Raymond.
Yeah, I'm here to continue to track what my buddy Jim is up to and abstract whatever brilliance we can from him and the group here around identity. Really, dancing that tension I feel between this expenditure of energy to create cross-platform compatibility, for lack of a better description, cross-identity interoperability, versus the point at which something gets created that just kind of obliterates the need to have so many different platforms, because it's really just like, this is obviously a better way to do things. And if you've swallowed the HoloChain pill, you believe that about HoloChain. So I have. And so I'm in this dance of exploration on what can a really, kind of most universal standard of identity look like. So thanks for doing this, Jim, and thanks for everyone who's here.
Sure. All right. We had some discussion before, and we're still grappling with how we engage with RChain and the venture groups, Pythia and Reflective, and we've sort of been guided to look for support from them, all three, for our identity effort, and that's immediate source of funding for continuing our collaboration among our communities. And we have the standards to work with today to create service discovery for our objects, our social objects, our things, and our people, which ought to have a unique identity. That we can use in collaborating on developing strong pseudo-anonymous unique identities. With regard to the question of architecture, I see us faced with the reality that we have to support every architecture. We can't choose one. That a self-sovereign identity is not of any particular technology. And nobody will ever agree on one technology. To that end, we have a proposal to create the structure of our decentralized identifiers as a graph database, or conceptually as a graph database. And in order for individuals to construct this graph and be able to share it with other people, or stitch their graphs together with other people's graphs, we've been looking seriously into using the Apollo and GraphQL structure as a unifying element to have all of our information from all data sources and all different identity providers, all different, the Uport, the Sovereign, the Facebook, to put those all that information into one simple structure of a graph that represents its decentralized identifier, for which we can keep the metadata for the service discovery on what services it does, and further, we can act on the object, knowing its behavior and its capabilities in a well-defined way, can provide access to those capabilities, both by ourselves interactively or by our user agent that does authorizations for us when we're not online, or it implements our rules for authorizations and access to our stuff. Now, John has been pretty critical of GraphQL. He thinks it bloats the system. It's unnecessary bloat. And from John's point of view, he's already agile with using all these APIs directly in his day job. And he sees GraphQL as an unnecessary complication. I see it as something that reifies the social ledger, that it creates the skeleton of all of the stuff. Whatever we say and do becomes part of the ledger, and is connected to the activities and actions in a very simple manner. And I think duplicating this capability without using GraphQL would be a major effort. So so I ask you to consider it, and I believe that if I can succeed, experimentation over planning, if I can succeed at accessing Mattermost and the social ledger, combining it in one graph in a manner that I want to use the information, not the manner that it's stored, with a caching layer automated here with data memoing and event processing, so that the updates, if something is updated, we get an event, or it caches and we pull. But in essence, we have a short-term memory that's created by this GraphQL that is managed for us automatically. Well, more or less. We have to configure it. But everything becomes configuration. There's no programming necessary in most cases, and we can reduce it to a one-click install for any of these interfaces to any of our tools. So the self-sovereign tech stack I see as a prerequisite to having a self-sovereign identity, and it gives us a clear, because it's back-end agnostic, when we move to HoloChain or RChain, we only have to change the configurations. We don't have to change any of the applications, which are essentially serverless applications that access HoloChain and RChain ultimately. Thoughts?
What do you need to get it done?
We need developers, and I've been very lax. I wanted to engage the Mattermost add-on group in HoloChain, which I think there's people there that have the necessary skills to help get this off the ground easily. In the meantime, I've been setting up my own environment, and I set up an environment on a server, which I can demonstrate. It implements a simple blog just with configurations. It uses a SQL database. It uses a REST API, and it uses a MongoDB. But it picks data from different places to make its records, and it's pretty sweet, and it doesn't seem that complicated. But I haven't finished going through the tutorial myself. Joachim has completed it to a certain extent, and he's begun to work on the Firebase interface, which will give us access to the existing social ledger data. Once we have that, we have data, and we can, we can start to having the data is the key thing. Then we can visualize it anyway. We can utilize it anyway. We can start to put constraints on on our graph of people and actions and common connections, different activities in different organizations that link to the same GitHub issue, all sorts of stuff. But
okay, well, I have a question. I don't know if I'm going to get my terminology right, but if I'm understanding the proposal correctly, there is some kind of re-centralization that happens in the fact that we need some kind of server to act as this graph of graph servers, right? This thing we can do this universal query on.
Well, ideally, yes, you want to have GraphQL running somewhere on a server for you, okay, and for your community. Okay, there's a your personal graph, which you want, which is stitched with other graphs, so you want it served somewhere. They call this serverless, but it's not really serverless. Okay, you still have to have some trusted GraphQL server out there in order for it to act as you all the time. Now, you can still use it. GraphQL native, it's very straightforward to make an Android or iPhone app that supports GraphQL natively on the device.
Okay, well, this is where potentially we can construct a distributed network with a HoloChain app that would gateway out to the GraphQL one or more GraphQL servers in a dynamic manner, so that you could query any node in the distributed network. You could put out your identity query, and it would the distributed network would handle finding a graph server for you and returning you a result. So distribute the centralization. So put a distributed layer between the centralization layer, because the centralization layer in question here is just a window to another distributed layer.
Yeah,
So
but, we want to let the user choose a trusted GraphQL server. So one of the mechanisms may be to find you a trusted server, but the most important thing is that for it to be self-sovereign is for the individual to specify what they trust in terms of a GraphQL server.
yes, and so that can exist together. One of the options in what you trust might be a distributed HoloChain, network of self-managing trusted servers. Basically, I don't know I think those are the best words. So in other words, the nodes themselves and the users of the trusted network work together to decide what's trustable and what's not. And
Right.
so you can have both happening at the same time. You could select an individual GraphQL server, or you could select to grab a GraphQL server front end that is actually a distributed network of nodes maintaining a list of trusted GraphQL servers. that can be self-managing.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I expect, you know, that, no, I mean, GraphQL is not centralized in the sense that, you know, you're linking or you're stitching them, and ultimately most or all of the graphs are going to be on RChain. They're not going to be in some other backend. So, you know, you simply, you know, GraphQL is just becomes an interface to RChain.
Right. Well, I guess part of what I'm saying is actually involves Holo as well as RChain. So what Holo does, and when the advantage of what I'm trying to get at here, is that Holo at the DNS level is going to serve you up a node. So you put out a DNS request for a certain service.
Oh, okay.
It's going to pick a node for you. It's going to pick any one of the nodes in the distributed network. And then those nodes in the distributed network, because Holo knows which nodes are alive and active, right? So any one of those nodes is then going to ask what GraphQL servers are running and you know, that are maintaining agreement with the standard list of potential data sources of identity, right? Your GraphQL server, am I correct in that understanding that the GraphQL server will have some kind of configuration file that specifies which data sources it will query?
Yes. You know, that's mainly what you do is manage the configuration files. When you change your file, the configuration file, the GraphQL server immediately serves the data, or serves the API.
So yeah, I mean, it's complicated, but what I am proposing is, yes, through a DNS query on Holo, we can identify a RChain node that will identify a GraphQL server that will very likely go back to another RChain node to request, which is running DPKI, you know, as one of the many options. So, but that does give you, that gives you the best of all worlds, right? You get the single DNS server. You get the trust management, you get the community trust management built in. You get multiple people, anyone gets the ability to run the GraphQL server if they want to play that role, and asked to be trusted to maintain the list that has been agreed upon by the community as valid data sources.
Yeah, I guess there's all kinds of ways, you know, it fits in. You know, the basic thing is that you have private data, you have the graph of that private data, and that's all you really need to keep on your phone or you know, in a trusted service, because everything else you're using other people's GraphQL servers. Every time you link out of your own personal world, you're no longer employing your, you know, it's fully decentralized. In that, you know, every link in a graph could take you to another GraphQL server.
Every link in the graph could take you to another GraphQL server.
Right. If you know, if we stitch a link to my information from your graph, okay, you'll be using my server, my GraphQL server. Wait. Well, if you copy it, you'll be using yours. But if you link to it, you'll be using mine. And that has to do with mine always has to do the authentication, has to do the authorization.
Yeah, and even in my proposal, so you end up trusting, you still end up trusting a DNS provider, which is a pretty large, trusted, centralized system already. I guess that's one advantage, but you do end up trusting the DNS, right? So I guess that's what I'm saying might be an advantage. If we could trust, if the only thing we have to get trust in, we let the community manage. The only thing we trust is this DNS serving us.
Yeah. Well,
properly.
Basically what, we have the first step is DID colon. Then the next step in the namespace is one of the decentralized DNS systems. Okay, so if it's :hollow, then hollow is the trusted DNS service for that DID. Okay,
Right.
and then hollow can, when I add a link to my personal server that runs on my phone, let's say, then from hollow it links to my graph in my phone. So at that point in the hierarchy, when it's stitched to another GraphQL provider. If that makes any sense. Well, let's not go into details here.
Yeah, no, well, okay. I'm a detailed guy. Sorry, I just want to get stuff running, man. I want to be able to, literally in the next month or two, I want to have New Earth Directory up and running. And if this could be the answer, I'm totally willing to do this. And stand behind this as a standard means, even though it's this really complicated layer upon layer upon layer. If it does end up giving us a community-based trust mechanism, that's what I'm looking for.
All right. So you're interested. I was thinking of engaging it through the Mattermost add-ons, so that we first have Mattermost on there, and the social ledger data, and the first thing that would be needed is the DID directory on RChain. I expect which would be very, very similar to the DPKI, which the service discovery includes the DKPI. Where the self-sovereign tech stack would come into play is in the user interface to the DKPI or the DID directory on RChain. And Okay, I guess on the other fronts is the whole identity plan, and the potential for funding a BYOID identity co-op. And stewardship of a BYOID token, which would be awarded for collaboration on identity, attesting to a person's self-sovereign identity, so that it can become trusted in a team, and then trusted in an organization, and then ultimately trusted in the federation and in the national identity ecosystem. Trust is easy to lose, and the individual is the best source of information on the individual, and they have a right to be able to control the use of that information. And people building strong collective identities has a value, and that value would be represented in the BYOID token. And they would be exchanged with our partners, and would be good for identity services. And what services we collaborate and how we make them economically scalable is to be determined. But basically, we would put the token in the hands of the co-op in terms of its future application. Any I guess I think that's something that would be good to move forward with. John, what are your thoughts in terms of getting identity off the ground here?
Breaking it into simpler projects. So one you've already described in a way which is a bit, I think it's healthy to be a skeptic. So I'm skeptical about GraphQL. Somebody in the team has to do that, so it's me. But I think we need to get on with a proof of concept on that. If services that we're going to integrate with don't provide a GraphQL server natively, which as things stand today is almost everything, a custom GraphQL wrapper has to be created. To me, it's another layer of indirection. It's more complexity. It will drive up costs. It widens the surface area for cyber attacks greatly. And I think, HoloChain, RChain, DigLife, security should be #1 for us. So all those, I'd like to see those tested beforehand, but we're volunteers, we've got limited time and resources. There's only so much we can do. I understand the rationale. I understand it simplifies things to a certain extent, but until services do provide, if they do, and I've already made a case that that's not going to happen, but if they do, in the meantime, it's the responsibility of us to create these GraphQL wrappers. And then there's the OAuth challenge as well. that needs to be, how do we then stitch in OAuth and related standards into a scheme that is all built around GraphQL. And there's one thing that we've got to bear in mind as well, that GraphQL really is a specification from Facebook, which is a query language for APIs. A lot of people conflate it with graph databases. They are completely different. What has happened is some graph database vendors, dgraph for example, have created GraphQL Plus. So in order to query, to bring it up to the level of, say, Sparkle or RDF query languages, they've added lots and lots of extensions, which of course wouldn't be compatible with Apollo, and it makes the whole system even more complex.
Point taken, John, and that's why we're going to be doing testing. The fact that it is self-sovereign code, that you don't have to trust anybody else's software for your own stuff. You know, it's just the GraphQL support that you run. That it's all open source and you run yourself, and I think, you know, cooperating on security is part of what it's about. You know, the security is a prerequisite to identity, and so the point's very well taken there. You know, so I think, you know, a Mattermost, any Mattermost application. I mean, one of the side things we're trying to do here is create a personal Zapier. You know, provide access to developing workflows, which, you know, identity involves workflows. You know, we can only avoid that so long. And, you know, which is, you know, the processing of events from our the systems that we're on. So we have events coming in, which are then orchestrated according to the rules that we've set up. And access outside is controlled by our UMA. So, you know, the limitations of GraphQL, are real. It's not going to do everything for us. But it gives us access to everything. I mean, we can easily access data across all our sources to use in any other organization we want. I mean, in a regular fashion. Well, like you said, John, it may be too much too soon even. And that's why we need to test it. And I'm hoping that we can use it in some Mattermost integrations. Um, I'm wondering if it has application in how we can, how we might, it might be employed in the welcome bot, which there's some work on for Mattermost, or some preliminary work being done on.
Are you saying, Jim, that there's an integration available for Mattermost to, well, it'll be part of your implementation? You want to implement a plugin for Mattermost that people can allow their Mattermost instance to accept authentication through this identity network?
My understanding is that the authentication and interface to GraphQL is simply configuration, a couple of files, few files, and we're able to take the Swagger definition of the Mattermost APIs and import them. I haven't got into this yet, and I could be wrong about how easy it's going to be to support the full Mattermost APIs, including authorization and everything. But that's the first test, so to speak.
Okay. So wait,
the reason for that is that it's we're talking about patterns on channels as being the structure. Whether it's DHTs, ledgers, or conversations, and Mattermost is where we're having the conversations right now. So making those channels or linking those channels and our activities within teams with and domains and organizations.
Okay, you're talking about social ledger now, right?
Which is, the RChain notion of identity is you are what you say and do. So, that you're part of an activity in a group, you can choose to expose or not expose. But in any case, it's part of your identity.
Cool. I'm asking a more fundamental question about the integration of Mattermost. Are you talking about integrating Mattermost as a identity server or as an identity client, or both?
Well, yeah, I mean both. The self-sovereign stack, your identity, we have a whole bunch of identity providers that we could let people use. Okay, we're looking at using Glue for organizations. We're using Mattermost now because people already have a Mattermost identity. We don't have to set up a new one for them. But it's a very shallow identity, and there's very limited controls. But we can control them through the API to some extent, and we can enrich the identity by connecting it with identities in GitHub or HoloChain or whatever. It's not, there isn't a singular identity source. It's, we're looking at a single sign-on to everything where you choose how you are authenticated and what factors are required for someone to act as you on the net. So
So both is the answer to the question. We want to be able to have Mattermost servers act as identity providers, and we want.
But basically, we're trusting the Mattermost identity, which is probably something we won't be doing in the long run. It should your Mattermost identity should only give you access to the Mattermost domain. It shouldn't give you anything else, really. You have a self-sovereign identity that controls your.
If you want your self-sovereign identity to be your Mattermost login on some Mattermost server somewhere, that's what we're talking about, yes?
Right. Logging into Mattermost, I guess, doesn't give you doesn't give your bot permission to access GitHub unless you enable that. Well, this is details again, but
I'm just trying to get so because I can propose this to the RChain team in terms of integrating our Mattermost server.
Right.
Will we do it as am I proposing we do it as an identity server in this now?
Oh yes. Well, you see
that we are doing it as an identity client.
Yeah.
Or
the ID functions, the UMA. Okay, we definitely want to put into the social ledger 1.5 as well as the 2. I mean, what we can do today is implement it in the new architecture and interface it with the social ledger through the existing database, social ledger database, as a proof of concept. And because we have the GraphQL gives us back-end flexibility, we can move it onto RChain when the time comes.
Right. In this case, I'm only talking about the 1,000+ people we have using the RChain chat server. It's a pretty robust community that if we can allow that community to expand by people not having to register with our Mattermost server as, create an account because they can reference an account on an external identity provider, that would be cool. So they can just come into our Mattermost server and start chatting with their GitHub ID or with any other identity provider out there. Facebook, Twitter, whatever it be.
Right. So, this is part of the onboarding, and even if you have someone who comes in and they discover the I have to log in here, huh? But if, for example, I come from the town square in BYOID, and I come to RChain. Where's RChain? Well, I come into RChain, let's say, and oops. And I come into the town square channel here. And I come into the channel. If I wasn't already a member, I want to be made a member, right? If it's an open community. These are the kinds of things that we want to automate. And this is, so this is, you know, this is an onboarding and identity. And so, yes, the answer is that, you know, we're definitely going in that direction, so that I guess if we can migrate the identities out of Mattermost, we can use a third-party provider which authenticates his GitHub account and creates the Mattermost account if it's necessary, and allows him to use his GitHub ID to get into Mattermost. We can get the token, whatever, for that.
Well, whenever you want to talk specifics about that as it relates to the HoloChain Mattermost, I'm ready to do it. Let me know. I want to, if that's a means by which we can support this effort, I'm open to it.
Well, you know, let's, I mean, you know, Christina is writing up some use cases for onboarding welcome bot. If you could give me a few lines as to what you, so that I'm clear on the functionality that you want, that would be helpful. And you know, I'll try to move that forward in the community while we both can, right? But I guess we need a clear description of the use case that we want to support.
Okay. It's hard to do because I don't know what's unclear about what I'm saying. So I feel like I'm being perfectly clear, but somehow I'm not. So maybe we'll just take it offline, Jim. Try to.
Yeah, let's. I think I missed something. You know, I got a little bit off track there. That's one of my major flaws, is that I keep looking at a wider picture and lose focus.
Raymond, is there something you could suggest as a sort of an action plan for maybe the next week before the next meeting?
Well, I'm interested in seeing a demo of where, whatever you were speaking about, Jim, where you have modeled some of this out in a working situation. I would love to see all that, see the walkthrough of that. And then I think perhaps from there, specific actions could evolve.
Yeah, you know, I'm thinking that you know, that essentially the major issue right now is onboarding. I mean, I'm still onboarding myself, going through the tutorial. And I mean, we do have some funding. We could pay crypto for developers to help get us started in this activity. But
Count me in. Let's just map out a plan, and if I can be one of those developers, I'm glad to step in that capacity.
Awesome. So I guess in the Mattermost integration channel, we'll try to arrange a work study and give some links and see what people want to accomplish with the integrations. My thinking is that we need the well, I guess I'm confused about whether are we going to jump into identity, or are we going to start with doing some other integration we want to do. And I guess I should focus on the identity and the DID directory and then I guess linking to the social ledger. If it's going to be a meaningful, useful, if it's going to be useful at all, it has to link to some application, and it doesn't have to be the social ledger, but the social ledger has a number of advantages. Main disadvantages is that it's been difficult to get people to use the social ledger. It does have
just that little thing. So that's where that's where I generally work backwards from. Is let's find a specific use case that would affect users and be interesting to users, that would engage them in thinking about what we're proposing here by seeing it in action in some way. So one thing that users are currently doing is coming to the Holochain Mattermost server. That's just one thing I happen to be aware of. So if we said to them, you don't have to register an account on this server anymore. You don't have to go through the process of giving us your information and creating your account. You can integrate with an external identity provider, not directly with GitHub, not directly with Facebook, not directly with Twitter like it is now on most sites, but through this new system that allows you to specify the backend provider as part of your login username, right? So your username is actually, right, it's going to be the GraphQL server : whatever, I don't know, or whatever your identity becomes in that scenario. You can now just go into the Mattermost server as that identity somehow.
Well, We have to assign a password on the Mattermost server as things are. No, we don't. We don't. What am I saying? Yeah. Gee. Okay. I guess one issue is we already have a lot of users that have accounts on Mattermost. Okay, we could set them up automatically to use their Mattermost login to get in, and then new users would have the option. We would be providing an identity provider. That would perform the service discovery in the DID directory, log the user in. Okay, yeah, let's do it. We can definitely do it.
I think that would be a use case that, because since Mattermost is such a robust community, and we have, in general, the number of Mattermost servers coming online. So if we had some kind of, I don't know what it looks like, but some kind of Mattermost plugin that enabled people who want to use a particular Mattermost server to identify themselves with their BYOID, they could do so. The BYOD Mattermost plugin. And then the reverse of that is a BYOD server Mattermost plugin, which allows your Mattermost registrations to become identities that can be used elsewhere.
Well, the one issue I have is when somebody comes into a server for the first time, let's say,
right?
How does it know if it doesn't know if they have an independent identity already on that Mattermost server? That's the one issue. And
well, the user is going to know that because either they're just going to use their straight login, in my case, Razor. Either I'm going to log in with Razor or I'm going to log in with, a big long identity string. And there's two different accounts. Either I'm Razor or I'm that. The ability to connect those accounts would be a secondary thing we may or may not ever need to do.
Yeah, well, I still see a problem here with knowing if we don't know that they have an account or not on the server. We can offer them a login, or we could say log in with X, Y, and Z. But if they choose something different, how do we know that it's the same person? Well, if they use the same email, we know.
Well, I was just suggesting that could be an optional second step that we could, to link accounts later. If we wanted to figure that out later, we could. So you're saying, look, oh shit, I ended up with 4 Mattermost accounts on this one server. Well, that's actually all me. I'd like to link them, but that's something we can do later. But I think from the user's perspective, that's not going to be super confusing.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to confuse the user. Either they're going to log in with their regular, just straight username, or they're going to log in with a BYOD identity string. Those are 2 separate logins, and it should be clear to them that that's what it is. I don't think they would assume otherwise. But I could be wrong.
Okay, yeah, I think, that's, something that needs to be tackled in any case. And, we can dive into that.
Yeah, so we could work backwards from your little example, whatever you've done, and take what pieces of that are relevant and build from there. And I'm totally willing to make time for that, especially if some rocks can flow my way, whatever. That certainly helps.
Awesome. Okay. I did a terrible job of taking notes here. We're sort of gone over the hour. Not that I have to go anywhere, but if there's any notes that people could put in, we need to, we should have some work product from our open meeting. I can see that many of the same things were covered as in the last week. We don't need to mention the same. Okay, so GraphQL is mostly about the user experience. And there's not much user experience in this use case, except, you know, viewing your identities and managing them, and, you know, adding UMA functionality. So what we're really testing here is how easy is it to use the OAuth services via GraphQL. As you know, as GraphQL so far seems to know how to access you know, it handles the authentications for you pretty well. I mean, you just put an API key or whatever in the configuration and it works most of the time. Sometimes. How's Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern time for you, Ray?
We'll check. No good. I have an hour at 1 and an hour at 3. And I'm pretty open at 6 and beyond. Or I have the morning also. Is there something already happening at 2 p.m. on Monday?
Well, yeah, we have Adi, who has been is not a developer, but he's pretty sharp, and he got the GraphQL working pretty far on his personal machine. And in order to onboard programmers, we have to be able to set it up and run it in our local machine. Okay, and then we can push it to the GitHub and to share it with everybody.
Right. Okay. I can see about moving my 2 o'clock and get back to you.
Yeah, the other thing I was thinking is if we did it at 1 or 3, if we did it at 1 or 3, then if we did it at 1, okay, we could get a lot of stuff done that I can share with Adi at 2. Or if we do it at 3, maybe we can get to a point where we can more usefully use your talents, and Adi typically would be available to stay more, longer than the hour. Quite often go 2 hours anyway. So you would be there for the second hour.
Yeah, that sounds good. I can do that.
If I know of someone who's interested, can I tell them to just show up to that meeting, a developer?
Absolutely. You can have them show up at 2, so we don't waste too much of Raymond's time with neophytes.
Well, okay, but they're okay, but 3, they might only be able to come at 3, and they can just listen for the beginning. But okay, I mean, I don't even know if he's going to be available or interested, but it seems like it's right up his alley. So I'm going to check with him.
Yeah. I did reach out to Brian.
Oh, did you? Okay, I'll check with him too.
On something.
I think he might. Did you talk to this project about it with him? Because I think he could be interested in this.
Yeah, well, we were working with HybridAuth. Okay, HybridAuth is a tool that authenticates to just about everything that's written in PHP.
Mm-hmm.
We had problems with when we install stuff with composers, the paths are all screwed up, and we haven't figured out how to straighten them out. Now that I mean, it certainly would be good to get Composer running, and Composer could do authorizations for us, which would be good. But there is overlap in the functionality between HybridAuth that runs in PHP and GraphQL, which runs on Node. So I guess it's not, we can postpone the HybridAuth stuff until we get deeper into, in other words, the hybrid auth is another way, is another tool that could implement what Raymond is talking about.
Okay.
There's two potential paths we have here. And, you know, with our experimentation over planning ethic, we probably want to try both. And Kit has joined, I just noticed. Welcome, Kit.
Hi, Kit.
Hey there. Yeah, I'm sort of catching up a bit. Happy to see you guys are plugging away, making plans.
Okay, so I'll just put 2 p.m. noob, 3 p.m. ST with Raymond.
Okay, yeah, I've got it down for 3 p.m. Monday. You want to give me a link now or some other time between now and then?
I think I can add you to an event.
Is it the same Zoom room?
Yeah, the same room.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll put that down, and I'll be here at 3 on Monday. And with that, if it's all right, I'll hop off now.
Awesome. What is this?
Okay.
Bye, Razor.
Oh, it looks like we moved the 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So 3 o'clock is the right time.
Okay.
So let me, I'll fix that.
Okay, so I should still come at 3.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I will talk to you then, Jim.
Later, guy. Thanks for coming. Good to see you.
Sure thing. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
Bye, Raymond.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, I gotta go soon too. Is there anything we need to discuss before I go? You're on mute.
Jim, you're muted.
Yeah, I would like to discuss the co-op with Kit if he wants to hang around, or if anyone else wants to discuss the co-op more.
Can you be more specific?
Well, I guess
Are we done with the other meeting? Should we stop that recording and start a new one?
yeah. Um,